All right, joining me today, if you can't tell, if you're watching on YouTube and you see the sweatshirt I've got on, I've got my Whalers gear on. We're talking Hartford Whalers with Pat Pickens, author of The Rise, Fall, and Enduring Mystique of New England's second greatest NHL franchise. A little bit of a debatable title there, but Pat, thanks so much for joining the podcast today.
Thanks, Jared. Let me just start by saying that you're certainly not the first to bring up the title of the book, as there are more than a handful of Whalers fans that are a little bitter about playing second fiddle to the Bruins. So I'm gonna throw out the disclaimer that this was not my title. My would not have been my title, but I am willing to take any heat or flack. You can send it my way if you. Anyone who cares to take issue with the title, my name's on the book. I'll own it.
Just busting on you there. So
Yeah.
I got to start with the, I guess, kind of the easy question for an author here, and that's why the Whalers? What got you interested in putting a book together on this team?
I think probably heard me either radio in advance because it's the same story over and over again. But so I'm obviously a big hockey fan. Grew up in central New Jersey. Big fan of the Devils as a kid, and obviously I remember the Whalers. I'm of age enough where there were you could turn on ESPN or ESPN2 and see a game at the Civic Center or see the game. The Whalers playing on TV, or the Devils would play them, or they go to Hartford and play them. And I think my Devils fandom certainly influenced some of this, where they played a couple of epic series with the Carolina Hurricanes. They won when the Devils went to the Cup final in 2001. Then in 2002, Carolina went to the Cup final, turned the tables on the Devils. Then I went to college in Connecticut. I went to Start University. Shout out to them. And then that's sort of where my journalism career started, and covering hockey started too. So, and then I got a job at the Fairfield Citizen. I'll plug them too. At one of the Hearst papers, there was a weekly newspaper. I was a sports editor, and I started in the winter of 2008. And I remember it was right around February 2008, and I remember going up there. Among my first assignments was to go cover high school hockey, the state playoffs, because the state playoffs had started, and the state playoffs are pretty intense in Connecticut. Fans go crazy, the kids go crazy, the fans go crazy. It's played at Ingalls Rink every year, or has been historically. Great setting, great venue, great tournament. I love the high school hockey tournament in Connecticut. But I was going to early round games up in New Haven County. And I remember, seeing, kids, teenagers, 16, 17, 18, in Whalers memorabilia, hats, shirts, sweatshirts, jerseys, etc. And I looked at it, I was like, well, that's weird. Because, the people who were 15, 16, 17 then were like 4, 5, 6 when the team left. So I was like, that's cool, but it's also kind of weird. And then, I would go shopping, or I'd go, go to the mall on my days off or on weekends and stuff like that. And I would see huge Whalers displays at the malls in Connecticut. And I found out that at Bradley Airport, they have the huge Whalers display in the terminal, where the, hats and shirts and jerseys and, sweatshirts. And I was like, that's weird. That sort of filed that one away. And I just sort of, it was sort of remarkable. And then, so I got, I was working in Fairfield. I worked there for 5.5 years, which, felt way longer than that. No disrespect to the people I covered in Connecticut. It was fun doing it. I gave it my best, but I didn't want to cover high school sports forever. And so I had this idea in the back of my head, because I dug in a little bit, saw that the story of the Whalers had not been told yet. I was sort of fascinated by that too, where the only other book written by the Whalers was by Jack Lautier, and the team commissioned it. It was in 1987. And a lot of change between 87 and 2000, even 2007, and then since now. So I was trying to make a mark somewhere. We had gone, I sports writer through the recession, and the recession was really, really hard on newspapers, on journalism. It continues to be, obviously, but that was a real seminal moment for journalism. and I was trying to find my way in the industry because I didn't know where I was going. I knew I loved sports. I knew I wanted to cover pro sports, college sports, something else, something different, something bigger than Connecticut high school sports. And got a nudge just to start. I started writing. I had this book idea in the back of my head. I hadn't done any work on it because I didn't. I made all these excuses in my head, and I said I can't do it. I don't know anything. And so I got a nudge just to do it. And so I started. My sports editor in college was Brad Holland, who was the son of Ken Holland.
Mm-hmm.
And he put me in touch with Ken Holland. It was the first interview. And Ken Holland led me to Mark Howe. And then, Stan Fischler and Howard Baldwin. I reached out to him, sort of would bring this up where it's like, hey, look, I want to write a book about the Whalers. Do you have any information? I was starting with a completely blank canvas because, like I said, I was a Devils fan and obviously knew of the Whalers history, but didn't appreciate the brand. And that's really and it really just took off from there. It's been 10 years from start to finish. I started in the fall of 11, October of 20. So long road, create a lot of twists and turns, a lot of moments where I wasn't sure I could do it, but happy it came out and happy the reception. This reception's been great so far.
Yeah. So take us through. I want to dive into the story a little bit, and I think there are so many different angles you could take about this team. But I think let's start with this region, and I know we poked fun of it a little bit in the title, but how good was this region, and is it still for hockey?
Yeah.
And maybe how, in some senses, was the region a downfall for the Whalers, being sandwiched here in between Boston and New York?
Yeah, I think there's, it's interesting because Boston is a great hockey region, a great hockey city, I'd say. And New England's a great hockey region. You look at some of the prowess of the New England schools that aren't just in Boston. Maine has a great history of college hockey, and it's mostly college hockey. But Maine and Providence has had some really good recent success, and Quinnipiac and Yale are Quinnipiac especially this year, but Quinnipiac is a great program, and so there's definitely hockey. Hockey runs deep in the region in New England for sure, and I think more so than even down here in New York and New Jersey, I would say that because, like I said, I covered the state playoffs in hockey, and there were 1,000 fans at a quarterfinal game, and I was amazed. I was like, wow, look at all these people, look at these kids, they're really into it, they know what's going on. And you can't say that about every region. So I think but I think Peter Karmanos spoke to this specifically when he and I spoke about 2.5 years ago, and he said that in Hartford, it's funny because Hartford's a great Hartford looks on paper looks like a great market. It's far enough from Boston, it's far enough from New York. There's affluence, there's industry, there's sponsorships, there's everything you need to essentially put together a big league market. And the people are big league. They've been following UConn for long enough, and they've been following. They love the Red Sox, they love the Celtics and the Knicks, and it's this sort of, like you said, middle ground of Boston, New York. The problem is that you're competing with them too. You're far enough away from them for it to look interesting. But then when you get down to it, people in Connecticut will travel to Boston. People in Fairfield County, New Haven County, Fairfield County will travel to Boston to go to a Celtics game, to go to a Bruins game. They'll watch the game on Nesson instead of going to the Civic Center or going to even smaller town stuff. And I think that, there definitely was some of that market working against them where in a lot of ways, because obviously the Whalers were not successful, especially towards the end. They had a little run there in the late 80s, early 90s where they were legitimate Stanley Cup contender a few seasons. I'd say 3 seasons, and then made the playoffs 7 years in a row. But sort of as the sport was coming of age, where salaries were going crazy and TV money was going crazy, and new arenas were coming up, the Whalers really fell behind in that regard. And then the region sort of, wants to be the region. Connecticut wants to be a major league sport. They want to follow the big team. They want to be, there's always the joke that, the entire state jumped on the Patriots bandwagon when Bill Belichick was there. It still is there, obviously, but you know, and UConn only became popular when Jim Calhoun was the coach, and the Red Sox really took off when they're running the mid 2000s. And so, you know, there is a belief among people in Connecticut that it's something of a bandwagon state. And the Whalers, when they were hot, people followed them along too. But then, you know, they lost in the first round of playoffs. I think it was 6 years in a row, and then they missed the playoffs for something like 6 or 7 years. Their last 6 or 7 years, and you know, people don't want to, you know, have their heart broken. People don't want to have that, you know, invest their time and money and energy into a team that is only going to go, you know, 6 playoff games or 5 playoff games. And so and along with the rise of UConn, you know, men's basketball, women's basketball, and there are other financial factors too at play. But yeah, I think the region certainly is weird because, like I said, it's a great hockey region. There's, you know, Yale was in the first college hockey game, you know, over 100 years ago. So there is hockey in Connecticut in its blood. But when the Whalers came to Hartford, there were sort of these, it's sort of this, you know, like what are we watching here from fans in Connecticut and in Hartford area, and then it sort of took off because they were successful. They made the playoffs every year in the WHA, and then the NHL was there, and again there were all these other factors that came into play, financial and buildings and things like that. But you're right, the region was sort of was tricky. Where people, you know, there's a lot of interest and people's attention gets diverted quickly.
Talk about the importance of having an arena, because I know that's something you bring up in the book in the Civic Center there.
Yeah.
And we're looking back at, you know, when we're talking now, just a few days ago was the anniversary of the roof caving in, which is a big turning point, it seems.
Yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, where, you know, the team's now, you know, rebuilding the Civic Center here. They're playing in the mall, as everyone, you know, jokingly referred to it. But in some ways, you know, they were one of the first teams to have that team store, as you mentioned, you know, within the arena area there. And how big was that arena? And then again, the arena became a big point of contention when it was ultimately time for the team to leave. So how important is that arena to the success of the hockey team?
It's funny, you're right, 100% right. Sorry. Well, it's integral, and it's become more so in recent years, just because you're right. You know, the Civic Center was the reason the Whalers got. There were a lot of factors, but you're appropriate. I mean, you certainly are correct in that the arena had been a point of contention for a long time because of its proximity to the mall, where, you know, again, it became sort of synonymous with the mall. ESPN certainly didn't hurt that, because every time they'd refer to the Civic Center, it'd be, you know, Chris Berman would get on the TV and he'd say, well, we go to the mall with the highlights. And it's like, okay, so they play in a mall. First off, the Hockey Hall of Fame is in a mall too. So it's not like there's no sort of hockey, you know, mall tie-ins. You know, the most prestigious building in the sport is in and you know, Maple Leaf Gardens is a supermarket now. So, you know, there certainly is some retail, you know, hockey crossover there, but yeah, the arena was important for them in the first place. And you brought up the roof collapse was crazy, because like you said, we're coming up, the anniversary was January 18th, and that was actually, you know, so start with the arena. The Civic Center was built to try to attract an ABA team, Spirit of St. Louis, and Howard Baldwin, they were playing in WHA in Boston. They won the cup, the Abgo World Cup, the first year, and they were going to play a full season at Boston Garden and realized they couldn't survive. So Howard Baldwin's like, where can, you know, we need to survive. We need to play somewhere. So where are we going to go? Civic Center was being built in Hartford. He went down to Hartford and he said he got a deal done in 30 minutes. So, you know, in that way, that was the first way the Civic Center saved the Whalers. You know, they move in 75, they have the roof collapse in 78. And to your point, you know, the roof collapse, you know, essentially got them, you know, along with other factors. The roof collapse mandated arena upgrades. They had this shares program where the local industries would invest money in the team, and, you know, and essentially fund the team. So like Aetna and Cigna mostly the insurance companies, but the Hartford Current, the newspaper up there, they owned a partial share of the ownership of the team, and they would essentially fund the team and see the day-to-day operations of Howard Baldwin and his people, the GM and the coach, et cetera, et cetera. So when the roof collapsed, what were they going to do? Howard got them to go to Springfield for the interim while the roof was being rebuilt. And the community in Hartford wanted to make this a major league city, make that a major league city, really. And to the point where they invested, they obviously got the new roof, but they got luxury suites and they upgraded. They added seats. They had about 4,500 seats, or 4,000, about 5,000 seats.
Mhm.
Where it was a 10,500 seat arena when the arena opened, and they made it a 15,000 seat arena, which back then was big enough to be an NHL arena. So and then when Howard could present the Whalers as a potential NHL option, he says, "Hey, look, we've got this NHL arena, and we just redid the roof, so the roof's not going to collapse again." So there was the building was on par with places like the Spectrum or the Nassau Coliseum. In 1980, it was essentially a state-of-the-art arena. But then, to the point you were sort of getting at there, where and part of this is ownership too, because when Howard left Hartford, he the corporate community essentially instructed him to find a buyer, and the buyer was ended up being Richard Gordon, who is not from Connecticut, he's from upstate New York, but tried really hard to make the thing work. But he had so much debt, his financial backer went to prison in a Ponzi scheme. And he was accruing debt every day and every week and every month, and was essentially leveraging off all of his revenue streams to the state in exchange for debt relief. So he gave away the luxury box money, he gave away the parking, the concessions, all these lucrative things that made essentially made arenas the moneymaker in the 90s and 2000s.
Mhm.
So when Peter Karmanos bought the team, he looked at their financials and said, "Hey, we're not making money on anything." So he said, "We want to get a new arena." And the political will was probably not there to get a new arena in Hartford, especially since it had been fewer than 20 years since they upgraded. And yet, in those 15 years, the arena did not. I mean, I wouldn't say it was obsolete, but it definitely fell way behind. So the arena deal was really the point of contention, which was obviously led to the so many teams age where there were budding markets and budding cities, and if you weren't going to give teams a sweetheart arena deal or stadium deal, etc., you're going to lose your team. And so Karmanos and the state negotiated to try and get an arena deal worked out. They fell about $3 million short, is my understanding. And Karmanos' perception is that the governor kicked him out because he said if the team doesn't get a new arena, they have to leave. And so at that point, Karmanos said, "Look, we're not dealing with someone in good faith here," and we started looking for the way out. They were trying to build the arena where Dunkin' Donuts Park, the AA base stadium
Mhm.
is. There's a lot of land over there. It would have made a great location right on the Connecticut River there. It's unfortunate because my belief is that if they had figured out the arena deal, and if UConn could have used some political will to push for that, there were a lot of factors that led to ultimately the demise. But if they could have hung on with a new arena there, they would still be there with the way the NHL has evolved financially, with revenue sharing, TV, and again, with ownership collecting more revenue streams with some of those things. So, but yeah, the arenas, and they're still, like you said, they're still working on it. They're still trying to get money to put. They're still it's in the budget. It's earmarked that there's money to be put into the arena. It just it's still a point of contention. Like, we got to upgrade this arena. They know they got to do it. They just it's a matter of doing it.
When it comes time to looking at the decision to leave Hartford and move to Carolina, who do you view as more of that villain in this situation? Is it Peter Karmanos, or is it more Governor Rowland in this situation? Just from your reporting and going through interviews with the book, how did you kind of find that out to be? And if it's unfair to call him a villain, feel free to switch the terminology there.
No, I think Karmanos is happy to wear the hat because he doesn't care. If he wanted to do a big PR campaign where he would say, "Hey, look, this is what I was doing. This is what I was trying." I mean, I think part of the reason why I love the finished product of the book is that Karmanos' voice is in there, and some of Roland's people are in there too, quoted. So you get all those sides, and I feel so grateful for Peter Karmanos because he gave me a couple hours. I met him at his office in suburban Detroit, and we talked, and he sort of he gave it to me from his own perspective, and the people in Connecticut might not like this, like his perspective, but I think it was important to get his perspective because he doesn't talk much about what happened there, what was going on there, and he hasn't really been certainly hasn't been a public figure in Connecticut, and the press has killed him, and deservedly so to some degree, but also it's he doesn't fight back against it, so I was glad to get him and his perspective in the book because fans and people who wonder like what really happened, and from his perspective, we'll get to that. A lot of blame gets placed at his feet. I said, and I agree to some degree because he left the team a year earlier. He promised 4 years, and he paid $20 million to exit an exit fee a year early. So that looks really bad from a perspective, especially once they were trying to. They did this Save the Whalers campaign before the last season in Hartford where they were trying to drum up ticket sales and season ticket sales, and they got season tickets over 11,000. And they had this season where they were sort of knocking on the door in terms of playoffs, and they had been sort of knocking on the door for playoffs for a few years there. And so there was reason to believe that maybe there was hope. Again, Karmanos' belief is that Roland kicked him out because he said, they don't get a new arena, they have to go. Certainly Roland deserves some blame. Obviously, Richard Gordon deserves some blame again for leveraging all the financials, the revenue streams away. It led to this god awful. And I think I don't think he gets enough. I mean, the Current bashed him at the end where it said that he was the 1A and Karmanos was the one in terms of people at fault for the team leaving. There's this perception too that Roland was trying to for the Patriots to Hartford. My understanding from the people who I didn't talk to Roland, but I talked to some of his people, was that that's not accurate. Was that they realized how important the Whalers were and were trying really hard to do both with a football stadium and a new arena. I think the people of Connecticut deserve some level of blame too. Where again and obviously there's again we sort of got to that point where there were diverting interests and deservedly so. You can't expect people to root for a team to miss the playoffs that misses the playoffs every year. And again, as UConn rose, the UConn women's basketball undefeated season coincided with an NHL lockout, which really it set the Whalers back even further. So like if the Whalers were good and that was Karmanos' first year of owning the team too. So they invested a lot of money in the team. And then there was a lockout, and then there was the 35-0 UConn women's basketball team. So the region was sort of flying. And then the UConn men's team was in the Elite Eight that year. So there was a lot of, as the Whalers were like, hey, we're starting our season, the whole region was like, wow, women's basketball, UConn and men's basketball. Wow, they're awesome. Look at them. And the Whalers like, we're over here, we're playing. And so I think, and like I said, you can't fault people for rising ticket prices and having diverting interest. And there was some TV conflicts, as a rise of cable, rise of satellite, it became less integral to get to go to the game, to get the tickets to go to the game. You could watch the game on Nesson from Hartford, from New Haven, from Litchfield County, from any county in Connecticut except Fairfield. In Fairfield County, they only want to watch the Rangers and Knicks anyway. So, there were a lot of the villains. Villains is a strong term. Like I said, Karmanos will be the villain because he doesn't care. But there was definitely a lot of fault. There's a lot of people at fault for the team's ultimate demise.
As we look, a little bit more recently at things here, and you bring it up in the book too, is the popularity of the Whalers gear and what Carolina has done of late in incorporating that back into the mainstream. We see teams do throwbacks all the time now, but this probably happened to be one of the more controversial ones we've seen in terms of, especially from a Connecticut perspective. I think it bothered a lot of people to see the Whalers gear back out down there in Carolina. Take us through what you were able to find in terms of the gear, and especially how it related to that situation down in Carolina of late.
Yeah, I think I feel fortunate too, because the people in Carolina have been great. I mean, they were great to me. They opened up about what went into that. Karmanos was really certainly an impediment. He didn't want that to go anywhere near the ice, because he wanted Hartford, essentially dead and buried. And yet for some reason it hasn't been. So your point is taken. When I started this book, Howard Baldwin told me the Whalers had like the 11th best, it's in the book, 11th best merchandise sales of any NHL team, and they hadn't existed at that point in 15 years, and it's only gotten hotter since then. So I think they're in the top 5. I would guess they're in the top 5, or certainly in the top 10 in terms of merchandise sales now. And so when Karmanos sold his majority stake to Tom Dundon in 2018, in the winter of 2018, they said, hey, look, we are having a brand issue in Carolina. And they were, because they hadn't made the playoffs in 10 years, going on 10 years. And they, Dundon is wants to be this sort of think outside the box, maverick owner who, he doesn't want a defenseman. He doesn't want to pay for scouting. He doesn't want to pay for his, Chuck Caton and John Forsland got let go because they were lowballed in contract offers. So it was sort of like to do things differently. And when the marketing people in Carolina presented it to Peter Karmanos, he would shoot it down. He'd say, no, we're not wearing that jersey. We're not celebrating the history of the Whalers. And but when Dundon came in, he said, we have to do this, because again, they were going on 10 years of not making the playoffs. And what I was told was they needed something they could control. And they little did they know what was going to happen. They made the playoffs. They had this bunch of jerks campaign with Don Cherry, and then they had the David Ayers thing shortly thereafter, and they became this sort of buzzsaw team, that was a Stanley Cup contender at this point. But back then, 4 years ago at this point, I guess it is, or 3-ish years ago, they really wanted to get something they could control that would put them on the stage. And so they had the Whalers night. I know it's funny that, because I from the minute I heard about it, I said, the people in Connecticut are not going to like this. And yet the people I spoke with in Connecticut, part of the people were just like, hey, look, this is great. Look at the jerseys on the ice. This is, our team is alive. And I think there's some, absent a team in Hartford, that's what they're trying to do. They're just trying to keep the team living and breathing and going. And they don't want it to be the Cleveland Barons or the California Seals or, some of the teams that are essentially dead and buried again. So, and what my understanding was, I spoke with Mike Rogers, who was a great Whalers player, center in the early NHL days, in the WHA days, but also the early NHL days, centered a line with Blaine Stoughton and Pat Boutet, the bash dash stash line. And so Rogers was the guest of honor for the first one and dropped the puck, and he joined the broadcast, and they let John Forsland loose some stories with Skip Cunningham, who'd been the equipment manager for every game in franchise history at that point. And they had a lot of the alumni come back. And what they said, what Rogers and what Forsland and those guys said, they said that the team did it right. They really did. They really lead. Ron Francis was the general manager still at that point, and he essentially mandated that they have, the green jerseys with the Pucky the Whale, the one they wore in 84, 85. So to make it a little more authentic, and everybody sort of lauds how it was done. Now, that's not to say there wasn't controversy. Your point, exactly, because ironically, some of the controversy came from Boston, where Jack Edwards took issue with Pyatt McKenzie's number 19, which was retired, being worn when Dougie Dougie Hamilton wore number 19 on those Whalers nights. So obviously Pi McKenzie had his number retired by the Whalers, but former Bruins great. And obviously the people in Connecticut are not exactly ecstatic about them Carolina co-opting Whalers history to sort of launch their own brand. And my understanding is my thought is on it is that I don't know that the people in Carolina, I mean, I've been told the people in Carolina are interested in it. They're sort of fascinated by it, but that's not their history either. They don't, what do they care about Hartford? But they did some things the right way. They donated funds to Bob Crawford's Skate of Champions Foundation up in Connecticut. So there was some money that got poured into Connecticut hockey no matter whether gimmick or stunt or whatever. And they're sort of continuing to do this. So I think, is it the right thing to do? I don't know. It's if I were, if I were a fan, I don't know how I feel about it. Because the other thing was it sort of opened the floodgates to some degree, because the Avalanche started wearing the Nordiques jersey last year, and the reverse throw program from Adidas. So, and like you said, there's some throwbacks. Obviously the NBA has been pretty ubiquitous with some of these former city jerseys and what have you, and the Lakers and some of their teams. I would ask you, how do you feel about it? As someone who's from Connecticut, who's essentially there, not watching from afar.
It's mixed for me. In some ways it's nice to see it back out on the ice, but it's at the end of the day, it's what could have been, and what could be happening now. I mean, one thing that was always interesting to me is we've seen the Celtics, and I think you talked about it in the book a little bit. They used to play a game or two at the Civic Center, even if it was an exhibition game. If Carolina did something like that and came and played a game up at the Civic Center, I think that'd be one way maybe people get behind it a little bit more, and that's a way to tie it back. I know Carolina's in a much better spot now than they were when they debuted this, and hey, maybe back then, playing a game in Hartford, you would have turned out, a full house compared to what you might have gotten if you played it in Carolina. Yeah. So I think it's interesting. Yeah. But, as we've talked about a little bit, it's just such a hot button issue. The merchandise, the gear, the songs, everything's still out there and so mainstream. It's nice to still see it represented, at least in some capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and I think what's interesting is that it's sort of, you're right, and it's to me it's kind of bizarre. I always refer to it as the enduring kitsch. Yeah, is my term. Sort of trademarking this term, enduring kitsch, where it's their legacy, it's their identity. The Pucky mascot, or that you mentioned the brass bonanza, or the logo in the jersey with the H in the negative space, and the colors, even the color scheme back then, the green was frowned upon. It was not tough enough. And then Brian Burke came in and changed the logo and made it navy and gray. And I mean, that's the logo that I grew up with. So I have some fondness for it, but people are, they want the green, they want the Pucky, they want the original logo, they want the brass bonanza. Even when the Hurricanes took the ice, like when in that first Whalers night, they played brass bonanza when the team scored, and Mike Rogers referred to them as the Whalers, mistakenly said, "Oh, the Whalers take a 4-1 lead." It's like they're the Hurricanes.
Yeah. I'll wrap on this one, just given what sure. of the NHL scene and the research you did for the book. And it's just a question I think that's been asked since the Whalers have left. And that's, can you see a team coming back to Hartford?
I would never say never, because I would not have said Winnipeg would have looked like a market, and a major pro NHL market. 12 years ago, and yet they put in the work. They got the arena, they had the ownership stake in place, and I think the NHL is constantly assessing other markets. We heard there was reporting last week that Quebec City gave a presentation to the league, and the league is in no position to expand. Like, they're at 32. 32 is a nice round number.
unless they're going to go to 40, but no other league has gone to 40 or even gone to at this point. I guess MLS, and MLS is on Hartford's radar too. I think Hartford hosted, correct me if I'm wrong, but Hartford hosted the Toronto FC during the pandemic when they couldn't play in Toronto. So yeah, they played at Rentschler, yes?
Yeah. They've had a couple of like the World Cup, and Olympic teams play at Rentschler as well.
Yeah, right, exactly. So they're trying, and I think like I said, I never say never because there's some investment going in Hartford. There's real estate, there's transit. They recently the train line from New Haven to Springfield through Hartford is becoming is relatively new. I think it's last 3-4 years. Where people can now commute from New Haven to Hartford, can commute from Springfield to Hartford, can get downtown. The arena is obviously the big question mark, and I think that's going to be what stands in the way of any potential deal in the future. And I Connecticut is people in Connecticut, the identity I think is more basketball than hockey. I don't think there is a basketball. You can't really fight basketball because of this. You mentioned the Celtics and their foothold on the region, and that they played the games in Hartford. They don't anymore, but the Celtics are pretty, stayed in the New England. But it's unlikely is my answer, is my direct answer, because like I said, they're at 32. They're at the NHL. I said, this is really the thing that is the biggest hang up for them in Quebec and some of these places, is that there are 16 Eastern time zone market teams in the Eastern Conference. So there's not really there's not one, like Arizona's in trouble financially in their building situation, but and the Red Wings and Blue Jackets used to be in the Western Conference, but they really the travel is such a detriment, and you'd be hard pressed to push them to go back. So I think getting a team into Hartford, it would have to be an Eastern Conference team relocating, I would say. And a lot of those are not in bad financial shape all of a sudden, where you could have looked at Florida, you could have looked at Carolina in past years. Yeah. And, barring some sort of real setback to the Canadian dollar, I guess the Senators are a team that could be in play potentially with their arena situation. It just doesn't seem like Hartford quite has its ducks in a row to make a serious push at the moment. Like I said, and I'm not sure that there are people who would love it. Obviously, the Booster Club members, and there are people who are nostalgic and would love to see the Hartford Whalers back on the ice. I just don't know if there's enough of that. If there's enough of a drive and a push. I think what the arena upgrades are mandating. Upgrades is essentially to lure concerts and to lure, essentially make UConn a more attractive program for UConn fans, and again to attract concerts and tour to Hartford, where there's this sudden rise in arenas in the greater Northeast, where you have Boston and you have three, you have Long Island has a new arena, you have the Garden, which everyone plays the Garden, you have Barclays in Brooklyn, you have New Jersey's arena is 15 years old, still pretty new compared to Hartford. And the Islanders were an option until they got their new arena. But it's the arena is a big issue, obviously, in terms of getting a hockey team. That's not to say that Hartford could not be in play for an MLS team, for a soccer team, some sort of situation there. It's really more a matter of if the sort of get if the will of the people is there for that. If the people are not interested in attracting a team, they'll keep going to Boston, they'll keep going to New York, they'll keep going to UConn and stuff like that. And I don't. So I think I would never say never, like I said, but it would be hard just because it seems like Hartford's fallen behind some other cities.
Yeah.
And Howard Baldwin really tried to make that happen. He sort of got some momentum boosted. And it's funny, he mentioned, he and I spoke a few times, and he said that he really was disappointed with with how the city's innovative level had sort of dissipated, where again, we mentioned the arena collapse and that the shares, the group of the shareholders and the corporate community which funded the team, they really advocated for this arena. They advocated for the upgrades. And when Howard went into Hartford and presented this big new presentation, which would have been $100 million of public money to upgrade the Civic Center to attract an NHL team, they sort of laughed at. They didn't laugh at him, but they didn't really take him seriously. And they and there was some skepticism and cynicism that had sort of crept into the region. And it's funny because Howard swears that if they had sort of had their ducks in a row in 2011, that the Jets could have been in Hartford, what were the Atlanta Thrashers, and you know, given now what the state is planning to spend in terms of arena upgrades, you know, $100 million doesn't seem like that much anymore.
No. And
but
really
there was definitely
Yeah, no, he really had an interesting plan put together to make it more than just an arena too, and really have it be an entertainment complex there, which I think would be big for the city. So it's an interesting proposal, and to be honest, I was a little bit surprised at the reaction as well.
Yeah. So I think it was, you know, in hindsight, you look back now 10 years on what he was trying to put together. It's disappointing because, you know, when I was starting that process and I was talking to Howard, I was like, man, this is a little bit odd, and it's a little bit weird, and it's a little bit, because they did a lot of things. They were trying to do a lot of things first rate. They did the I'm sure you remember the Whale Bowl outdoor game at Rentschler, where there was this huge, you know, celebration of hockey in Hartford area, where there were high school games, and there was, you know, obviously the alumni games of the, you know, some of the greats, and they get celebrities back and Whalers alumni, and then they had the big outdoor game with Providence and the Connecticut Whale. And I think, you know, Howard called the people small-minded. And, you know, I remember at the time thinking, this guy is just, you know, sort of trying to get his money and but in hindsight, you know, there was some momentum gained, and there, you know, obviously Howard has NHL, he's owned NHL. Well, he owned the Penguins. He's got people around the league and around the country who are, you know, big investors in. And then, you know, once he, you know, AHL and people in Hartford really don't like the AHL because it's a developmental league. And again, they love the big leagues, and they want to be the pro city. They're used to be in the pro city and supporting the big team. So I think, you know, in hindsight, that was a big moment for the city and a big opportunity lost. And so we'll see if one gets gained in the future again. You'd have to get a billionaire owner with some money to believe in the city of Hartford. And Howard's by no means a billionaire, but he certainly believes in, or has believed in, Hartford, and to sort of run him out of town was pretty detrimental, I would say, looking back at it.
No, I think make interesting points there. Well, Pat, I really appreciate the time today. Again,
sure.
The book, the Whalers, the Rise, Fall, and Enduring Mystique of New England's second greatest NHL franchise. Highly recommend the book. Pat, appreciate you coming on today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jared. Really appreciate the time. Really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.